EA was just sold for $55 billion to the Saudis, something called Silver Lake Partners, another investment firm, and Jared Kushner, Donald Trump's son-in-law. So this is Mark Darrah. He has worked at Bioware he worked there for I think close to 20 years. I know he was like really big on the Dragon Age series, Dragon Age Origins 2, 3, Dragon Age Origins 2, and Inquisition. But with Valguard, before it was Valguard, it was like started development. He was working on him and Mike Laidlaw, who also left, but it got canceled. They shut it down completely, and had them help make and finish Anthem. So they had to help get that across the finish line. So that got shelved. I believe the first one was codenamed Joplin. The first Dragon Age ended up being Valguard, but the one before that. And then they started again. And somewhere down the line, it got canceled again. So they had to reboot it for a third time, I believe. And by the time that happened, it was being developed with a multiplayer component to it, with microtransactions built into it. But after the big giant hit that was Star Wars Jedi Survivor was the first one, or Jedi Order, I forget what it's called. The one with the Cal Kestis, the first one, how that did so great as just a single player game. They allowed Bioware to go in and rip out all the microtransactions, but you still had that like game set up to be like that style. So they had like a microtransaction type of game, live service game already set up, and they stripped it of that stuff, but you still had the bones of a live service game. So Valguard was like destined to fail no matter what, because it was just terribly terrible. Like, it was just a horrible development cycle. And then you had Corinne Bush come in, and he just completely destroyed it big time and put the fucking final nail in the coffin with all the transgendeology stuff and all the woke stuff, the trans stuff, the gay stuff. It wasn't Dragon Age. It was all lighthearted, and the art style was fucking terrible. The writing was horrible, and it was like such terrible dialogue, man. But he worked there for 20 years. He left during the second iteration of Valguard, I believe. But then he came back later on as a consultant. But this is him talking about EA being sold and what it could mean for the future of Bioware. I personally think that, I don't know, they're in the hook for $20 billion debt, so they got to make that up. They have the sports franchises, which will do fantastic. You know, your Madden, FIFA, NHL is still pretty good too. I like NHL. It's my favorite one of the three. But Madden's second, FIFA's first, and NHL's third, because FIFA makes them a ton of fucking money because it's just such a giant global sport. But especially now with like the Middle East involved, they can make it even bigger. But like I said, he worked there for like I think 20 years. So we'll hear what he has to say about it
this morning. So let's talk about what seems to be happening and see if we can figure out the consequences this will have to the games that EA makes. I am not a financial analyst. I've talked about the fact that any attempt that I've ever made to predict what a stock is going to do has been wrong, even when I've tried to take my wrongness into account. So definitely do not make any.
I just want to check too real quick to see how I sound over the stream again real quick.
Based upon anything
just so you might hear an echo real quick.
The reality is that seems to be happening, and see if we can figure out the consequences. EA's been looking to change its corporate structure for a while. I'm pretty sure Plan A was the merger with NBC Universal, but this looks to be a Plan B. First of all, the players in this are obviously EA, but then three big financial players. There is Silver Lake, who does a lot of investment in tech companies. Affinity Partners, which is Jared Kushner's investment firm that does a lot of investment.
Yep, see, Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law, bought in.
Money. And finally, Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund, which is Saudi Arabia's attempt to diversify their economy by 2030 to move away from oil. The Saudi Public Investment Fund already owns about 10% of EA, which will be rolled over into the resulting deal. At current valuations, that's about $5 billion of the $55 billion. Another $20 billion is going to be debt that's taken on. If you've heard the term leverage buyout and you don't know what it means, what that means is that debt is going to be taken on as part of the event, and then that debt is going to go onto the EA's going.
Let me start again because I want to make it sound a little bit better. Hold on. It's being a YouTube video anyway, so don't even worry about it. Like, cut it, make it into a YouTube video. So, like I said, Mark Darrah worked at Bioware for 20 years. See what he has to say about the whole acquisition.
Going private for about $55 billion. We have more details released this morning, so let's talk about what seems to be happening and see if we can figure out the consequences this will have to the games that EA makes. I am not a financial analyst. I've talked about the fact that any attempt that I've ever made.
He also said, like, I like Mark Darrah. He's a good dude. I think he's a great developer. But he also said, he came back and said that, see, I don't know if he just said it because he had to, but he was only a consultant, so he shouldn't have had to. He was saying, like, this was, like, the best Dragon Age they before the game came out. This is the best Dragon Age we ever made. I truly feel that way. And not even only was it the worst fucking Dragon Age ever made, it was one of the fucking worst games I've ever played.
To predict what a stock is going to do has been wrong, even when I've tried to take my wrongness into account. So definitely do not make any investment decisions based upon anything I say today. The reality is that EA's been looking to change its corporate structure for a while. I'm pretty sure Plan A was the merger with NBC Universal, but this looks to be a plan.
See, I didn't know they were actually planning to merge with NBC Universal. I wonder what that would look like. I check that out. Maybe you can find that details online. I'll look later. But obviously it didn't happen. They went with the Saudi fund and Jared Kushner for $55 billion. And I think, see, I heard it was like one of the biggest acquisitions ever. Apparently it's the biggest like acquisition ever. Like ever. Which is fucking crazy for a video game company.
B. First of all, the players in this are obviously EA, but then three big financial players. There is Silver Lake, who does a lot of investment in tech companies. Affinity Partners, which is Jared Kushner's investment firm that does a lot of investment, often backed by Middle Eastern money. And finally, Saudi Arabia's public investment fund, which is Saudi Arabia's
I don't know what the hell that means.
To diversify their economy by 2030 to move away from oil. The Saudi public investment fund already owns about 10% of EA, which will be rolled over into the resulting deal at current.
Now, the Saudi Arabia fund, not only do they now the owners of EA, but they also own about I think 5% of Nintendo. Maybe 8% of Nintendo, like 5% of Take-Two, and like 5.1% of Capcom too. So the Saudi Arabian fund has their hands all over gaming right now, and esports too. Like they're really trying to make video games and stuff, I guess, popular there, or they just see good investments. I don't know, but they got their hands everywhere.
Valuations. That's about $5 billion of the $55 billion. Another $20 billion is going to be debt that's taken on. If you've
heard $20 billion in debt.
The term leverage buyout and you don't know what it means, what that means is that debt is going to be taken on as part of the event, and then that debt is going to go onto the balance sheet of the company that's taken over. So after this closes, if it closes, EA is going to have an additional $20 billion worth of debt on their balance sheets. Obviously, adding $20 billion to your balance sheet is going to require you to pay a lot of interest. If we look at EA's current,
what the fuck is the interest on $20 billion?
Financials,
especially with these interest rates right now too. Oof.
They're netting out about $1.2 billion.
I didn't realize that he has a Dragon's Inquisition dragon back there. This is a little side tangent. I can't stand dragons in fantasy that are like this, where they have the first the claws. They shouldn't have these claws. It should just be wings and back legs. I can't stand that shit. It drives me nuts. Like the dragons, like in Game of Thrones, those are dragons. I hate these kind of dragons. It's just it drives me nuts. Anyway, let's go.
If that $20 billion is sitting at a 5% interest rate, that's $1 billion of interest that needs to be paid every year just to service that debt. So the company as it currently stands is in a dangerous position. Not perhaps as dangerous as what happened when Toys R Us got taken over in a leverage buyout.
Toys R Us ended up coming back.
Not a lot of room to play with there. If interest rates go up or a game does a little bit worse, you only have about $100 million.
Interest rates will start coming down more. They already did 25 basis points. We'll see more cuts.
Of leeway in order to keep your head above water. Have all this debt we now need to service, so you're going to look to save some money. Good news, by going private, you actually are going to save some money simply by not having to have investor relations people, to have the giant accounting group that's necessary to prepare your finances for your public statements. So there are savings that come simply from the act of going public. Is that hundreds of millions of dollars? No,
a lot of cost cutting.
But it's something. But additionally, especially for a company as historically financially conservative as EA, you're going to be looking for additional cost savings. And for a company where the majority of your costs come from people, that is likely...
He's going to get to it, but here's what they're going to do. They're going to start cutting people. You're going to see a whole bunch of studios just get completely fucking gutted. I'm talking like 45, 50% of some staff probably going to be gone. And I'll tell you right now, it's all you DEI activists that got hired and the Karens that got hired who don't know what the fuck they're doing only got hired because their race, gender, and sexual orientation. You're fucked. You're all getting fired, especially with the Saudis in charge. They don't play with any of that stuff. You're all gone. So go check McDonald's. Maybe they're hiring.
Going to mean layoffs and studio closures.
There's already rumors now that they want to cut a bunch of the devs, and instead of hiring new ones to take their spot, they'll hire some new ones to take their spot, but a lot of it's going to be whatchamacallit, what's the word I'm looking for? They're going to be, instead of hired new devs, they're going to just have AI do those jobs. So it's the future, baby.
And a dramatic reduction in people. I'm going to throw some very broad numbers, mainly for ease of math. If you use a fully loaded number of $200,000 per person for a full-time staff member, which is actually low in some places and high in others, but it's a good ballpark because that means if you let go of 5 people, you save $1 million a year. Then if you lay off
a lot of money.
500 people, then you save $100 million a year in salary and other
I believe
costs.
some of the studios are in Canada where it's extremely fucking expensive to operate. Where he worked, Bioware, is in Edmonton. Like, I think it's Edmonton. Is Edmonton a city or is it in Alberta? Hold on. I believe Edmonton is just like its own territory. No, it's a city in Alberta. Yeah, I was right. So it's extremely probably cheap to live there. And it's a more conservative area too. For like all of Canada, it's actually like a conservative area. That was one of the places people were talking about. How, remember when Trump was talking about buying Canada, make it the 51st state? Alberta was seriously considering doing that. They're a more conservative part of Canada than the rest. But like I said, Edmonton, Alberta, it's a fairly cheap place to operate. So I think that's, good for Bioware so far.
A year when you are now having to pay $1 billion to service your debt makes your situation a lot more
$20 billion
stable.
debt, just the interest
moves
alone.
You from only having $150 million of buffer to
like
almost
6 or 7% interest on that loan.
So that becomes a pretty attractive route to consider. So chances are one of the consequences of this is that there are going to be changes at EA in terms of structure, in terms of the games that they're making. When you look at the investments that the Saudi group has been making before now, they've been buying a lot of sports-related things.
Yep.
EA, which is now broken into 2 different groups.
The Saudis
EA
love
Sports
soccer.
And EA Entertainment. Half of that makes a ton of sense. EA Sports makes a ton of sense fitting into that portfolio of.
I think they try to spend like a bunch of like billions and billions of dollars to get Ronaldo to play there.
Leagues of sports, trying to turn Saudi Arabia into a destination for sports and sports-related things. They've also been investing in esports and other entertainment and video game-related properties. Definitely EA Sports and some of the more competitive aspects of the EA Entertainment portfolio make a lot of sense. Additionally, EA Sports is where most of the cash is thrown off from the game-making business. 75% of EA's money last
Especially
year
those
was made through live
microtransactions.
services. A ton of that were the Ultimate Teams from FIFA or
Yep.
Football Club and Madden. Speculation, but I wouldn't be surprised to find out that the Saudi Public Investment Fund is looking to maybe even acquire the FIFA organization and bring it under their umbrella. If
They're
were
trying.
to do
They
so,
probably are trying to do
suddenly
that.
Football Club can go back to being FIFA.
They got the
Not sure
money.
how much of a difference it
I
makes,
think
but
the
it could be
reporting
part
is
of
that they
the
have
strategy.
that Saudi fund, the PIF, Public Interest Fund, I think it's called. I forget. But apparently they have over $900 billion in a war chest to play around with. So they could buy literally anything they want. That's fucking crazy to think about. They could buy literally anything they want to buy. Holy fuck.
The Saudi government has been accused of sports washing, essentially going out and acquiring sports teams and events and other publicly facing things that occur in their country.
Like I said, they try to spend a couple billion to get Ronaldo to come there, but I don't think he did.
Some of the legitimate
I'm not a
human
soccer
rights
guy, so I'm not
violations
sure.
that
I
have
just
been
remember hearing that
leveled
story.
against the country. It's hard to imagine that acquiring a $55 billion media company, which is ultimately what EA is, won't play into that effort, won't be used in some way to further their own political goals in terms of public perception of the country. If the goal here is to generate cash flow, the sports part of the organization, pretty good at that. It generates pretty consistent cash flow. It's relatively mature. It's not growing super fast, but it definitely generates cash. So it seems like that part of the organization is very safe. When we look at the EA Entertainment part of the business, then we have to ask some other questions. I suspect games like Apex Legends still interested. They still generate a consistent
any kind of live service game
source. With the Battlefield team, I guess we will see what happens with Battlefield 6.
That'll do
good.
But
if Battlefield 6 is as successful as it is expected to be, we continue to see Battlefield games. Historically,
there's a new rumor out that they want to take a couple of studios, maybe just at DICE alone, and split into like 2 or 3 different studios, and just have them cranking out Battlefield games every year like Call of Duty. This year, Battlefield 6 coming out and Call of Duty Black Ops 7, I think it is. I don't even know what the hell they're on this now, Call of Duty. Call of Duty has been getting a lot of flack lately for just how fucking absurd that game has become. Like, you can play as Nicki Minaj and shit, and like have like Beavis, you can play as Beavis and Butthead, I think, in the game. I'm not sure. I don't play Call of Duty, but a lot of fans were bitching before even Battlefield 6 came out. They were bitching how they want to just return to like a cool ass military shooter, and that's exactly what Battlefield 6 is doing. So I still think Call of Duty will be the highest selling game this year, like always, but Battlefield 6 is gonna be right on their fucking tail. I bet. Watch. It looks. I played the beta and I don't play these kind of games like first person shooters. Not my thing, but I played the beta because everybody was talking about it and hyping it up, and I had a lot of fun. Not gonna lie, it was hard as fuck, and I died a million fucking times, but I had a lot of fun. So, like I said, still think Call of Duty is gonna be that top, seller every year, but Battlefield 6 is gonna be right behind them, and they're gonna, they're catching up.
Sims has been a good revenue source, confusingly understood by the EA organization, but a consistent source of cash. Does The Sims fit into potentially the messaging desires of the 3 groups that are involved in the acquisition? Potentially not, but it's potentially not super out of position. But then the remainder of EA, the other parts, the other development houses, the other groups that haven't shipped anything in a while or have shipped things that didn't do very well, so the groups working on the Marvel games and, of course, Bioware.
Oh yeah, make an Iron Man
I
game.
think going to be
that was still in development.
Different position.
They'll put that out.
If this
it's Marvel.
is a PR move for the Saudi government as much as it is a financial one, the studios that don't have much of a track record, what you might do is just come.
They're also working on a Black Panther game, I think. And that was led by a bunch of like DEI devs and like SJWs. I think some of them used to work at Sweet Baby Inc. And of course they didn't know what the fuck they were doing. They're just hired because they were like trans and all that weird shit. But I remember EA went to go check on it, and they were pissed about how far behind it was development-wise. They ended up canceling the game outright and closing the whole fucking studio down because they're just so far behind development-wise. Because these people got hired not based on skill or merit, but based solely on skin color, race, and gender ideology, which is just a fucking stupid. We're seeing it now. The entire video game industry is fucking collapsing on its face, and they're all getting bought out by Saudi Arabia and China. It's like crazy. Like Ubisoft, they went completely woke, destroyed their company. Now they're owned by China. EA, same fucking story. Now they're owned by the Saudi government. It's crazy because back in like 2017, 2018, especially in 2020, it really ramped up. A lot of these companies, and still across the board, media, movies, TV, streaming, games, everything. BlackRock and Vanguard were giving these guys big, like giving them out, like basically like loans, either very low interest loans or just like grants to hire a bunch of these DEI individuals. So of course the big giant corporations took that money and hired them. But in 2022, the entire economy shit the bed and we went to a recession and interest rates freaking skyrocketed. So that BlackRock and Vanguard money went bye-bye. So now EA, Ubisoft, all these people were on the hook now for these developers who couldn't do shit. So now like they're stuck with them and they're not getting any money for them anymore, and they can't develop games, so they just completely fucking just crashed their studios. So we had Ubisoft split off and start a whole new company with Tencent, a giant Chinese fucking conglomerate, and now EA being sold to the Saudis.
On the scale,
crazy.
And push their messaging in
completely different than it was about 5 years ago.
Directions that make you look good, or at the very least steer them away from messaging that make you look bad. But for the studios that have more of a track record, especially a track record that maybe doesn't line up with your own political views, again, Bioware, you're going to look at that studio and wonder how you make them fit into your new structure. It's hard to imagine that you have Bioware pivot from having very progressive messaging to having the reverse, because it's what the government wants. It's hard to imagine that the public perception of a game that comes out of Bioware, even if you do that, isn't apocalyptically bad. So in that case, you either have to decide that you're willing to just leave it alone, or you have to think that they don't fit anymore within the goals of this new organization. Now, I don't know how active this Saudi investment fund has been in pushing its politics into the groups.
So, my cat's behind me. So, with Bioware, with the Mass Effect and Dragon Age franchise, well, right now, as far as we know, Dragon Age is dead. And there's no plans that we make another one again after what Vanguard did. How fucking terrible it was. But, I mean, in Mass Effect, you had same-sex romances. In Dragon Age, you had same-sex romances plus transgender characters. And with the Saudi government in charge now of the future of these franchises, if they decide to keep the IP, which I think they will, because I watched a video before, he talked about that EA wasn't very, I could see him selling Dragon Age, but they were very keen, like very favorable towards Mass Effect. They really liked that franchise. So I think they hold on to Mass Effect, but seeing like transgender characters in Mass Effect, that ain't happening. And they might even scale back big time or even cut altogether gay relationships, which I'm fine with all that. Just make it a great ass game and stop pandering to these weirdos. But as far as I know, the Dragon Age franchise, even if the Saudis didn't buy it, it was dead and buried. They didn't want anything to do with it after Vanguard was doing so terrible, which sucks because you could make a great game of that. I could see them holding on to it and turning into something different, just because it's kind of like a dark fantasy, kind of like Game of Thrones, and that's still a giant, huge IP. So I mean, it's a global phenomenon. So I can see them taking Dragon Age and kind of spinning it into more of a Game of Thrones like game with like the dark fantasy. Go back to that, make it a little bit more grounded, not as fantastical, and just kind of like copy Game of Thrones basically. I can see them doing that with Dragon Age to save the franchise and revitalize it, or basically reboot it into something different. But I know he said before in a thing, because he was talking, interviewing somebody about the two franchises, that EA really, really likes the Mass Effect franchise. And as far as I know, right now, they're still working on the next game. And the guy heading the next Mass Effect game, Mike Gamble, he's somebody you can trust with the franchise. He's a great developer. As far as I know, I've been following for years. He worked on the original Mass Effect games. So like 1, 2, and 3. So he's a big industry veteran. He doesn't push any of that transgender DEI nonsense. He's just a regular dude who likes to make video games. So as of right now, I think it's still in good hands, Mass Effect 5. And it's a very small team working on it. And they said, like I said, they're going to start with a small team and ramp up as they need to progress the game. So they're not going to just, hire fucking 200 devs to work on it. They're going to work on it slowly and build it up. And as they go, if they need to hire more devs, that's what they'll do.
That it invests in. Sometimes these investment funds are very active. Sometimes they are very hands-off. I'm not actually aware enough of the actions that they've taken to know one way or the other, but it is going to be a factor going forward.
God, I love Monsters.
In the past, I've talked about
Monster, if you're watching this,
EA doesn't
sponsor
sell
me.
IPs, and the reason for that
There's a nice little monster fish in the back. That'd be nice.
Because the individuals who would be responsible for making those decisions, for looking for those opportunities, are actually incentivized to not take risks. That they are incentivized to not be the person who sold an IP that then turned into $1 billion franchise. That their actual incentives are to
kind of like not one to one, but it's kind of like this. I don't know if you watch football, but the New York Giants, they were a shitty fucking team. They had an all-star running back named Saquon Barkley, and I think they were trying to sign him, but they couldn't figure out a deal, and they didn't want to trade him, but they were kind of had to. And there's a video of it online. I think it's the GM at the time of the Giants. He might still be the same GM. I don't know, but he was like, if he goes to Philly, I'm going to be pissed. What happens? He comes to Philadelphia, has a fucking amazing. I think it's his first year with us. I think it was his first year with the Eagles. He had a fucking amazing season. Yeah, I think last year was his first year. And we won the fucking Super Bowl with him. So, like, that's the kind of like one-to-one. Like, imagine you saw Dragon Age is shit right now. It sold less than, I think, 1 million copies. When they had announced the numbers, it didn't sell. No surprise. And another big thing was EA, the FIFA, aka Football Club, that had weaker sales too. I don't know if he meant weaker sales because they hadn't, like, when they did the quarterly reports. I don't know if it was weaker sales or weaker microtransaction sales, but either way, it's bad. And the combination of those two things caused them to lose $6 billion in market cap valuation, and in one day their stock tanked 17%. So, like I said, Dragon Age is dead right now. But imagine you sell it to like PlayStation or Xbox or Tencent, and they make a big giant global fucking hit out of it. Now you look like a fucking idiot for selling it.
Do nothing, because that keeps them from getting into trouble.
So,
but as this deal closes, those incentives could radically change. We could enter into a situation where now the incentives are to shed costs or generate revenue, if at all possible. We need to generate revenue to pay down as much debt as we can as quickly as we can. We need to cut costs to
there'll be a lot of cost cutting coming.
More wiggle room to make sure that we are not in a dangerous position.
And the deal is supposed to go through in 2027.
When servicing our debt. So suddenly, people who have spent their careers trying to keep their heads down and not do anything that might get them in trouble in the future might suddenly find themselves in a situation where what they really need to do is sell as much as they can. EA has a huge repository of dormant IPs.
Yeah, they do.
They're just sitting there dormant. It seems unlikely that the new resulting structure is going to be eager to suddenly revive a bunch of those IPs. So one option might be to sell the whole lot of them for $100 million if you could get it, because $100 million can
it's $100 million. Yep.
You might even see them toying with the idea of shedding some of their existing studios. Maybe they shut them down, but maybe they look for opportunities to sell off entire studios or entire groups. Like I said, it makes a ton of sense for this new group to want
that's what's going to happen,
whole and strong and continuing doing what it's doing. EA Entertainment, the other group that is focused on other kinds of more traditional non-sports related games.
What I think is going to happen is they're going to keep Bioware, because like I said, it's stationed in Alberta, Edmonton, which isn't a very costly place to do business. Sci-fi is a big popular category, so they can use them to make Mass Effect. And so I think what they're going to do is keep all the sports studios and make the sports games. continue making these Star Wars games because it's such a fucking huge IP, and make Mass Effect games. And that'll be their core pillar: the sports games, Star Wars, and then Mass Effect every now and then. That's what I think is the future for EA right now.
May make
And they'll probably sell the Dragon Age license, I think.
a lot less sense. So you could imagine potentially all of EA Entertainment being sold off to another group with deep pockets, like, say, Sony. This deal has been in the works for a while. It is conceivable.
And there's new rumors
EA
out now that Sony wants to ramp up buying IP to really build up their, like IPs. They want to buy some more IPs.
His new structure was intentionally conceived with this action in mind. Or you could imagine that what happens is this new EA plucks all the parts it wants out of EA Entertainment and then sells off whatever's left over. And so what you end up with is this collection of studios that either haven't shipped a game ever or in a long time, and studios which have had a lot of trouble, or studios that make games that are expensive to make,
Bioware.
or studios that simply make the kind of games that this new company isn't interested in making.
Fuck,
anymore.
Bioware hasn't had a hit game since 2012.
It makes a lot of financial sense to try to sell those off. Is that going to happen?
Anthem
has
sucked.
a lot of momentum.
Andromeda
not
sucked.
doing that.
Valgar was terrible.
But we are in a new world now, and there's
Strikes.
going to be new people at the table who actually do have experience with that sort of thing, who may push for that sort of thing. Does that mean that suddenly the Dragon Age IP is going to be up for sale, or that Bioware is going to be sold off, or that some of these other studios are going to be spun out?
If they do sell it, I don't think people want to buy studios. They want to buy IP.
And given their freedom, or buyers are going to be found? I don't know. I guess we'll find out as time goes on. But it's incredibly unlikely that EA stays exactly as it currently is in a private structure, especially carrying $20 billion worth of debt. Now, there's
You're going to see huge layoffs across the board.
Positive for a video game company going private. Public companies, especially North American public companies,
No more quarterly earnings report.
Report their earnings every quarter. They have to give financial guidance. They have to
and they have to like hit these quarterly earnings every quarter and have to show that they're making a profit. And it's I think Trump said he wants to do away with it because it's too much stress on a company to just every quarter to earn more and more and more. It's almost like it's so hard to do it. And a lot of these companies, like in video games, that do it now, they're just cutting staff. That's how they're doing it. Look at Microsoft. They've been doing it like crazy. They're just cutting staff because they brought on so much fucking at the integration of Activision Blizzard, and I don't think things are planning out the way they want it to right now. So they just keep cutting staff. So each quarterly earnings report, it looks like they're making more and more money. It's a stupid fucking process.
Release their financials on a very short-term basis. And the reality is, traditional video game development doesn't work that way.
No, it takes like 4 or 5 years to make it.
You have games that take
4 or 5, 6 years
to develop.
Yep.
And so they show up as a ongoing cost that's just constantly being a cost. And then they release in this burst of revenue, and then that revenue dwindles away, and then you go for many years, and then there's another burst of revenue.
Yeah.
One of the reasons why video game companies love live services so much is that
continuous
it
flow of money.
Their revenue. Like I said earlier, 75% of EA's revenue is currently coming from live services.
Microtransactions.
In a private company, you don't need to report your financials on a quarterly basis.
Which is
don't
great.
need to report your financials
At all.
There are people, obviously, who are interested in the company making money, but they can decide individually on their own terms what they want to see. If they want to see a studio go dark for 25 years in order to investigate some sort of radical new way to develop games, they can do that. Whereas as a publicly traded company, that's a very hard pitch.
Maybe hear the train in the background.
I think you can attribute a lot of the ills of AAA video games to the fate of publicly traded companies.
Yep.
To this line must go up, very short-term, 3-month focus on the way that revenue works. It makes it difficult to slip games. It makes it difficult to try new things. It makes the studios very risk averse. It makes the studios very focused on the wrong time horizons. So a private EA has the possibility, at least, to think about video game development in a different way. You could imagine a world where you have EA Sports generating revenue,
Yeah.
being this source of cash, servicing the debt, and paying
You
money
can take your time with your
into
single player
whatever
games to make
structure
them as
ends
best as
up
they
being
can
formed.
and release them
then
and make a
on the
ton of
other
fucking money.
hand, EA Entertainment being tasked with something different. Still making money, but with different time horizons. Maybe simply with the goal of making games that sell the most that they possibly can sell, regardless of when they release. Or making games that make EA look good, because maybe it becomes a PR arm, or a multitude of other potential goals that could be placed on EA Entertainment in this new structure. Because now you're in a conversation with a few private owners as opposed to with the stock market. And that conversation can take a very different cadence. Will
All
it?
true.
I don't know. As I said, we don't really know what the goals of this acquisition actually are. So is this a good thing or a bad thing? In the short term, it almost definitely means a bunch of layoffs in game studios,
Across the
but
board.
also in financial and PR roles. EA is going to shed a bunch
basically
of
gonna
people.
reboot
That
their
is
entire
definitely bad.
company.
In the medium term, it might mean studio closures, or it might mean studios being sold off, or IPs being sold off, which could be a good thing. In the long term, it's probably good for whatever EA still exists after all the dust settles, because by being a private company, they are able to approach their financials in the way that best suits the way the business is being run. But it's very unclear at this point what that resulting EA.
It's all supposed to go through in 2027. So for the next, well, basically out of 25. So all of 26. Don't expect any kind of like big game announcements, like single player wise or anything like that. You're just gonna get your Madden, your FIFA, and your NHL.
Actually looks like. It could allow for an EA that does more experimentation and allows game teams to take longer to release their games, resulting in better games. But it might also result in EA really focusing only on games that have very long, lucrative tails that spin off a lot of cash. We simply don't yet know what it's going to look like in the long term. So should you be hopeful? There is hope to be had here, but
I'm optimistic.
It's going to definitely be painful before that hope is going to come to fruition. If this deal goes through, this will, I think, be the largest leverage buyout of all time.
55
I'm not sure that
billion.
that is a title to be proud of, but it is a big deal. Is this deal likely to go through? Yeah, I'm pretty confident this deal is going to go through. It definitely helps when you have the president's son-in-law involved in the deal-making process. The only things that likely would torpedo it would be some dramatic change in the financial situation, like interest rates massively spiking, or some other thing that causes one of the partners
to not
have money anymore, or something that makes it undesirable from EA's standpoint, though I can't imagine what that would actually be. Special thanks to my members. They provide the resources that this channel needs to keep running. If you're interested in becoming a member,
there's a
link
Patreon
to that down in the description. We also have a Patreon if you're more interested in supporting the channel in that way. Both patrons and channel members get access to our Discord. So if you're interested in interacting with this community to a deeper level, that's a great way to do it. Also, at the higher tiers, patrons and channel members get early access to the videos. You wouldn't have gotten this one too much earlier, but sometimes the videos are up weeks, even months before they finally go live. So another reason to support the channel is to get early access to videos. What are you thinking right now? Do you think it's going to change anything? Do you think it's going to be good? Do you think...
Here's what I think happens. Goes through, they get all the IP. They are going to cut staff like fucking crazy. They're probably going to cut about 45% of the entire staff, I bet, across the entire fucking EA studios. They're going to definitely keep the sports games. You're going to have your FIFA, your Maddens, and your NHL. That's going to continue to roll out like clockwork with the live service built into them. I want to say I think they hold on to Bioware because, like I said, Alberta, Edmonton is not an expensive place to live or to probably develop games. Like, to run a business is probably not that expensive to be there. Small city, but they're already working on Mass Effect 5. So I think if they have a good foundation, they show it to the new owners, I think they will continue to let them develop the game. But I feel like they're going to end up putting microtransactions in the game. Not like pay to win, but more like cosmetics to, like, you know, put a plant in your ship or put a trophy over here. You can buy this model. Like, remember Mass Effect 2 and 3? You can get like the ship models. They might make them optionally like microtransaction wise, like to buy them with real currency. They could do that. I don't know if they will, but they could. So like I said, they're already starting to work on the Mass Effect, so that's good. Dragon Age, they're not working on that. And the last game that came out, Valgar, was a complete and utter embarrassing failure. So like I said, I could see them trying to reboot it into something different, more along the lines of Game of Thrones. But it might be hard to bring that to your bosses and say, listen, we have this fantasy IP that's also, you know, Game of Thrones is a big fantasy thing. We also have our own little fantasy thing, and we could make a big giant open world Game of Thrones game type of game with it. But then you had to explain to them that we had this other one too called Valgard that was an utter failure. So they might be like, maybe, but you already had a game like that and it was a complete and utter failure. So we're a little skeptical to launch another one because the other one did so fucking terrible. So it's up in the air. But I think, like I said, you're going to keep the sports games. They might even try to make their own kind of live service game, another one. Take the time making it. But that market's dried up. The whole live service, looter shooter type of thing, that's gone. It's done. It's too late to catch up and make a Fortnite. It's done and over with. So to keep the sports games going, that's a steady flow of income constantly. You can work on your single player games, your Star Wars, Jedi, whatever's next on the side, along with Mass Effect. Like I said, I think what they're gonna do really to save and like a lot of money is they're going to cut a bunch, like the DEI devs, the activists that got hired, and the Karens. You're fucked. You're gone. Goodbye. So they can get rid of all those people and actually keep the devs that are actually talented, and maybe hire some new ones that actually know what the fuck they're doing to make the games. Because you could probably make a good Mass Effect open world type of game in 3 or 4 years, and probably do it cheap too. Maybe they'll stop using Frostbite for everything too. So like, well, you got Madden, FIFA, NHL, and Battlefield 6. So you got 4 games there that can provide you a steady flow of income throughout the whole year. And then you like with Mass Effect, like I said, they're already working on that. So if like I said, I trust Mike Campbell with his visions, so he can do that on the side and probably have a small team develop that. Because the thing with Mass Effect, the next game doesn't have to be fucking amazing to succeed. It just has to be good. Like the next Mass Effect needs to be like an 8 or 9 out of 10, which I think they can do. Because Andromeda was so fucking bad. Anything above that will basically revitalize the franchise. So in the end right now, I think they cut a bunch of staff. All the DI activists and Karens are gone. They'll hire some actual devs at the studios, but they'll also replace a bunch of the ones they fire with AI. So if they fire, say, I don't know, 2,000 employees across the board, they might hire 900 back, or maybe say 1,000, and the other 1,000 fill that role with AI to save money. They'll continue to work on Madden, FIFA, NHL, and Battlefield 6 as their steady flow of income for the live service, microtransactions, and then work on like the next Star Wars game and Mass Effect game on the side, and take about 3 or 4 years to do that and put it out. So I think that's the future of EA right now. But I mean, let me know what you guys think.